Before I begin this essay, a few notes. Everything in this video is just my opinion. I'm just some idiot with a microphone and a degree in film and a minor in creative writing. Also, I've never done a video essay before, but I've been wanting to give it a shot for a while, so here goes. Also, there will be some mild spoilers for this entire arc, so if you've stumbled onto this video and you've never listened to the Adventure Zone, this may not be a good place to start, or you don't care about spoilers. It's up to you. There are few pieces of storytelling media quite like the podcast The Adventure Zone, specifically like the balance arc of The Adventure Zone. And I'm only talking about balance in this video. While I've enjoyed the mini-arcs and I am enjoying the Amnesty arc, I do feel like it doesn't quite have the same energy that the Adventure Zone balance arc had. The energy of Invention. In the opening prologue to Shakespeare's Henry V, a chorus asks us to open our minds and imagination. Think when we talk of horses that you see them, printing their proud hooves in the receiving earth, for 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings, carry them here and there, jumping o'er times, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass for the which supply. Admit me chorus to this history, who prologue like your humble patience pray. Gently to hear, kindly to judge, our play. By comparison, the first episode of The Adventure Zone opens like this.
Strap on your fantasy seatbelts and brace your asses for The Adventure Zone.
And while I doubt the McElroy boys intended at the start of this podcast to reach such heights as Shakespeare, the intent is the same. Sit back, strap in, and imagine along with our tale. The podcast started partially as a joke and as a way to fill in a week on their podcast My Brother, and Me, while Justin went on paternity leave after the birth of his daughter. And it's very apparent in the way the show begins, with silliness and a wizard named Taco, and oops, the Trace Horny boys accidentally razed a city to the ground.
And as you look around, you realize everything's gone. Phantolin's gone. And for about a half mile in diameter, all that you can see is a circle of black glass on the ground.
Well, this all sucks.
Sorry, everybody, that we misadventured. Sorry about Kurtz.
It's all fun and games here. They're not taking this seriously, and neither are we. But what is the show about? If you stumbled onto this not knowing anything about the Adventure Zone, here's a brief summary. 3 adventurers start on a journey. Taco, the elven wizard, played by Justin, Merle, the dwarf cleric, played by Dad Clint, and Magnus, the human warrior, played by Travis, and every other character is played by Griffin. All of them. The Trace Horny boys begin working for an organization called the Bureau of Balance to collect 7 dangerous relics that would destroy the world if they are left where they are. While on this journey, there's a lot of salsa-based humor for a while.
My goal for this adventure is to invent the taco.
It's sure.
Roll for salsa.
Also the greatest boy detective, a warlock named Garfield, a city where everyone looks like Tom Bodette, an all-powerful hunger that will consume all of existence, and a binacorn named Geralt who talks like Vin Diesel.
Let's attack.
Fuck that shit up, hell yeah.
On their show within a show, The Adventure Zone, where they lift up the curtain and talk about how and why they made the story choices that they did, the brothers are very frank about how they did not know what they were doing in the beginning, how they were essentially fucking around. Griffin has stated that he didn't even have a solid plan for the story in place until the end of the Petals to the Metal arc with the Red Robes and the death of Captain Bane. Part of what makes the Adventure Zone balance so unique was how we discovered the story right along with Griffin, Travis, Justin, and Clint. Rarely does a novel or television series begin with so little thought towards how it might end. Even with a show like Lost, where they definitely didn't know how it was going to end in Season 1, by about Season 4 or 5 they probably had a clear idea and were actively working towards it. Whereas this story began as a one-off notion that grew into this many-splendored thing. Even when Griffin had his overarching story in mind and was working towards it, the players still managed to surprise him, causing him to have to rework storylines on the fly, such as the incredible hands outstretched sequence of the Suffering Games, which erased an entire plotline involving Magnus and Kravitz fighting their way out of some alternate dimension. Griffin has discussed the process quite openly and how and when he thought of characters like Loop, the Red Robes, the Voidfish, and when the story came together in his mind. something he had to keep to himself for quite a long time before he was able to reveal the story to his dad and brothers.
Y'all, I'm sorry, my heart's racing because this next shit is like shit I've been wanting to get to for a year.
Go!
And Merle, you crack open the chest and retrieve the clothes within. A white cotton shirt and a pair of pants. Sturdy, denim, and blue. The membrane encasing this pod splits, and green brackish fluid splashes out and onto the floor. Barry's back.
There's some real excitement in the moments when Griffin surprises his family and us.
And he says, "You know, boys, I don't think Wonderland's that bad."
Him. I didn't say that.
Nobody hears you say that, Magnus, because you've just had the singular sensation of having your soul knocked out of your still living body.
And equal excitement in the moments when they surprise and confound him.
His soul is gone. It's in it's in a magic jar. The only action I can take is to project my soul up to 100 feet out of the container.
Okay.
And I'm going to take Magnus back.
That doesn't mean the show became a serious thing all the time. Far from it. Comedy continued to happen organically in the in-between moments.
You know, it doesn't always have to be goof dildo. I'm traveling around with the boner squad, and I never get to just say what I'm feeling. I have emotions. I'm multi-dimensional.
While the overarching story got bigger and bigger stakes and emotional payoffs.
And you all searched for her, Barry tirelessly, painfully so, but she was nowhere to be found. And all you had to go on was a note. Back soon.
Characters like Angus MacDonald, initially introduced for some silliness in a minor arc, would have an entire emotional journey by the story's end, and characters like Lucretia would become major players in the narrative with journeys that mirrored and played off of the journeys being taken by our main three heroes. And that's not even getting into the way this story is told. Podcasts are already such a weird beast because half of them are just an audio version of a talk show format where a bunch of people sit around discussing some particular subject.
Woody says, "I am a toy and a friend. My guess is no one's ever loved you before because you know nothing about hearts and love."
The read!
While the other, more narrative-based podcasts tend to function more like the radio shows of old, with dialogue that tells us what's happening augmented by some music and sound effects.
Hello, radio audience. I come to you live from under my desk, where I've dragged my microphone and am currently hiding in the fetal position. Station management has opened its door for the first time in my memory and is now roaming the building.
The Adventure Zone fits into both of these categories and neither of them on any given moment. Whereas the talk show podcast might be led by a host and a narrative podcast is populated with actors, the brothers are neither hosts nor actors. They're players. In any given scene, we could have a moment of in-character depth and emotion broken up by out-of-character comments from the brothers about the next dice roll. In a sense, the Adventure Zone and other actual play podcasts have sort of formed their own genre. Other such podcasts like Friends at the Table or Interstitial do feature a similar format, where the players will slip in and out of character depending on the needs of a moment. And on the Adventure Zone, it took them a while to even find those characters.
Excuse me, whichever one you are, the dwarf, there's a cane here to look at.
Oh, I'll check it out.
No, that won't do.
In the beginning of the show, the brothers would often tease each other and their dad for forgetting to even maintain a voice while they were in character. They often acted outside of their own character's D&D alignment because they hadn't really figured out what to do with them yet. Early on they made choices, mostly for their own sake, only later did it begin to feel like all four of them were actively working towards telling a story with character development. In a sense, the creation of the story becomes part of the overall narrative. The McElroys, as storytellers, became characters within the story, on a metatextual or possibly paratextual level. And initially, I wrote out a whole thing explaining the difference between para and metatext, and it sucked. So, metatext sort of critiques and comments on itself, and paratext is like how the creation of a thing and its creators relate to the thing for the listener or reader or whatever. I swear I have a real degree. Moving on. On the Adventure Zone, we're reminded constantly of the 4 very real people who are telling this tale to the point that they're part of it. Their fumbles and giggles don't detract from the story, they only add to it. It's an unusual way to build a narrative. It shouldn't work, and yet it does.
I shout, Abraca, fuck you! and I cast Magic Missile at him.
Okay.
4. Oof. Oof. How does 15 points of damage taste?
But that's just one piece of how the story works. The other piece is Griffin himself. When he isn't doing an entire cast of non-playable characters on his own, the thing I find fascinating is how he chooses to tell a story as both narrator and DM. How and when he steps in to build scenes around the characters. In sections that are sometimes pre-recorded, he will, in almost prose-like fashion, paint a scene for us with language that is both highly detailed and poetic.
The Phoenix Fire Gauntlet, it surfaces every few months, and it leaves a circular glass scar on the world's surface. There are reports of impossible things, monsters, and other phenomena conjured into existence by the Oculus. Magnus, your relic might be the most distressing of all of them, because you don't see anything change because of the chalice, and that's the problem. Time can be rewritten with the chalice, made miserable without your knowing it, and what you don't know, it haunts you, Magnus.
But it's also full of language that one might find in a screenplay.
We see a close-up of Davenport's face, his teeth gritted, his knuckles tight across the spokes of the Star Blaster's wheel.
It's interesting when we're told that we see a thing in close-up or a camera pans. It's a visual language being used, but one that screenwriters don't use very often. When I was in film school, I had multiple teachers tell me while writing a screenplay to never describe what the camera's doing. They say it takes the reader out of the story and annoys a director. We were encouraged to simply use language that implies what an imaginary camera might do. In fact, we were discouraged even from using language like "we see this" while describing a scene. There was a section called "We See" in How Not to Write a Screenplay by Denny Martin Flynn, a book I was required to read for one of my courses, and the summary of that section was mostly to use that language minimally or not at all. Griffin has no such limitations.
And then the camera pans up and up, above the temple, above the world, past the sky, and into the space beyond your plane. And there, drifting between the planes that once again dance around one another in a harmonious orbit, we see Fisher slowly swimming away from your home.
And I don't even think it's done intentionally. It's simply the way that made sense for him as a writer and creator to illustrate a story entirely through audio, and he mixes that language with incredibly detailed descriptions of a scene. And sometimes he tells us things that aren't visual at all, but instead are something from deep within the story itself that has to be said.
When someone leaves your life, those exits are not made equal. Some are beautiful and poetic and satisfying. Others are abrupt and unfair, but most are just unremarkable, unintentional, clumsy. Where Loop went, she didn't intend to end up there, and she certainly didn't intend to spend as much time away as she did.
The maxim of writing is show, don't tell, and Balance is a masterclass in violating that maxim while still telling an effective story. Some rules can be broken, and I would guess that this show breaks rules without even meaning to, and it works every time. We as listeners are shown a lot, but also told a lot, and it doesn't detract from the story. In this strange medium, it can often enhance it.
To understand this next part, I need you to imagine the apocalypse. Imagine it happens tomorrow, and that everyone you ever knew was gone, and that you survived. Imagine that feeling of loss. Imagine that guilt, the pressure it would put on you, how you would change beneath that pressure. What would you do to stop it? What would you do to protect the ones you loved, the ones who also felt that terrible weight? That is the reality of our heroes.
For me, the real turning point of the show came in the 11th hour, when Griffin began to draw backstory from each of the 3 main characters in between a pretty funny, but also very intense Groundhog Day scenario.
And you're being crushed by the shattered earth as it compresses down into the ground. And you hear an anguished scream come from something massive and furious. and all 3 of you have died. You'll have to do much better than that, loves. And then you wake up.
In those episodes, I, as the listener, could really feel the change that had begun in the show, how far we had come from Gerblins and Magic Brian, and yet it all felt rooted in the story the show was telling. We learned about some of each character's history, and it all drew on what we'd been presented earlier in a satisfying way. Magnus's backstory was even a way to bring back some elements from what had been Travis's notably darker original idea for the character that Griffin scrapped when they first started the podcast.
It was pitch fucking black.
It was very dark, and I will say that the one huge element that carried over into both is Julia.
I think a lot of the brilliance of Balance can be summed up by its 3 or possibly 4-part epilogue. It begins with Griffin posing a question or offer to each of the main 3 characters. Does Taco allow himself to open up to the world again? Will Merle help the world rebuild? And how does Magnus die? And their answers bring such closure for each character. The scene of Magnus reuniting with his wife in death fucks me up to this day. The show ends with a wedding and a glimpse into the future of each character and the ending that they earned. The final moments of the show tell us that this isn't the end, just an end for this story. And then Justin says,
Thus ends The Adventure Zone Balance, the story of 4 idiots that played D&D so hard that they made themselves cry.
And the brothers joke around for a few minutes as themselves, giving us a moment as listeners to soak in what we've just heard and smile through tears because we all cried at this story and they did too. Even as they joke about being coated in Cheeto dust and the pizza that never showed up, the brothers and their dad are as much a part of this story as the characters they created, and for a few minutes we get to listen to them talk and soak in the story they told. The Balance arc does continue in live shows, which mostly revel in the silliness of the world and the characters, but the main story for them is over. And I don't really consider the live shows when I think of Balance. Just the main story that the 4 of them created and all of us listened to with increasing wonder and joy as it unfolded. I brought up Shakespeare at the beginning of the video because it's a rad quote and I can be pretentious too, but also because I think the Adventure Zone could well be a modern work of art much like Shakespeare was in his day. I don't mean as that highest form of literature drowned to seas of high schoolers while they try to stay awake, but as pure entertainment.
Follow your spirit, and upon this charge, cry, God for Harry! God for Harry! England! And St. George!
In his day, Shakespeare was rowdy, raunchy, and still plucking at the heartstrings, and that's what the Adventure Zone is today. Ridiculous and dramatic in equal measure. That quote from Henry V is an invitation from writer to audience. Sit back and imagine along with us. It'll be fun. And every episode of the Adventure Zone Balance begins with a similar message, whether we're being told to brace our asses or being told to get ready for the end to begin. I brought up Amnesty at the beginning of this video, not to dunk on it. I said at the start that I've been enjoying the new arcs, and I am. But I also wanted to point out that in the wake of the absolutely huge arc that Balance became, I am personally not sure that the McElroys have quite found the formula with Amnesty. Mostly because there was no formula with Balance, and all of us were just along for this wild and unwieldy ride. With Amnesty, there's been more planning and more intent, which I'm not sure is an improvement. Because before, Griffin sort of drew backstory and character development out of the game one piece at a time, and now it's being done with the direct intention of creating drama. And literally, as I was editing this video, they released a new The Adventure Zone, where they talked about perhaps an over-enthusiasm in character creation and a lack of overarching narrative, so that happened. I say they haven't found the formula because Amnesty is only the second arc out of what will hopefully be many more stories. And with Adventure Zone being what it is, it will always be changing and evolving. Maybe they'll find that secret sauce of unexpected comedy and organic drama again, because at the end of the day, it was a balance. Hello everyone who sat through this whole thing. I love video essays, and I've been wanting to give one a go for a while, and then I decided to make my first one about a non-visual medium, which was smart. Thank you to all the fan artists who gave me permission to use their work in this piece. You'll see their names in the credits and links to their work in the YouTube description. The only other videos on this channel right now are fan videos. If you want to watch my development as an editor, I guess you can check those out. I might do more of these. I certainly have a few more half-written essays and ideas for topics on the new season of Doctor Who, Kingdom Hearts 3, and Prince of Egypt. We'll see if any of those ever happen. Also, I will say I didn't really touch on some of the problematic elements of the balance arc. Tacos named after Tex-Mex food, they buried some gays with Hurley and Sloane. I omitted this mostly because the McElroys have spent a lot of time actually addressing this stuff already, and I really have nothing of value to add other than I'm Jewish and the official comics version of Taco was never anti-Semitic. If every green character with a big nose is automatically anti-Semitic, then somebody has to go murder Shrek. But yeah. Nothing else to add on that topic. I think the boys are doing their best to be a positive force on the internet, and I appreciate them for it. And if by some insane chance a McElroy watches this, 420, dank memes, love those 7 parrots. Sorry I don't like Jimmy Buffett's music, Justin, okay? Thanks for watching, everybody.